بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Okay, in the last lesson that we had, we started hadith number 5 in Nawawi's 40 hadith, and this is a hadith of al-Mu'mineen Aisha radhiyallahu anha, in which she said that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa radd. That whoever introduced something into this affair of ours, that which is not from it, will have it rejected. And so the Shaykh, in the commentary upon this hadith, he made a number of points regarding innovations in general, and that how this hadith is a foundation and a basis for refuting every type of innovation, all forms of innovation. And he then mentioned some verses from a hadith, and he explained how innovations can occur in statements, likewise in beliefs, and likewise in actions. And so today we're going to finish off the second half of the discussion. So we did half last week, and we're going to finish off inshallah the second half of the discussion. And we reached the point where the Shaykh was going to now bring some of the definitions that the scholars have given for innovation. What is the definition of innovation? So the Shaykh says here that innovation, or the bid'ah, or that which is introduced into the religion, he says that there are numerous ta'rifat, numerous definitions, but because obviously it's due to the time, he's only going to discuss two definitions. The first definition is the famous and well-known definition given by Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah. So Imam al-Shatibi has a book called Al-I'tisam, and within this book Imam al-Shatibi has given like a good definition. And roughly speaking, the definition the Shaykh says is that in making his definition, Imam al-Shatibi has said that innovation is something that it's obviously it's an action, or it's a practice which is made as a path to be adhered to. Right? This is one of the characteristics of the innovation, that it's made as a path that is adhered to. And also from its characteristics is that the reason why a person acts upon it is that he or she is trying to resemble the Sharia. That by way of this action, they're trying to resemble something which is in the Sharia. And the Shaykh says that he's going to discuss this definition in a number of points. He says that there are 2 points that we should bear in mind from this definition. Is that first of all, innovation is something that is adhered to. Right? In other words, a person doesn't just do it once and that's it, it's never done again. Rather, it's taken as a path or a way that's constantly practiced and adhered to. So therefore it's like a path that is made, to follow, and a path that is adhered to. And the Shaykh says because the Shaykh says that it becomes like a path that one person, then a second person, then a third person, adheres to it and sticks to it and practices it, and then then it repeats itself. So in other words, the innovation, one of the features and characteristics of innovation is that it is something that becomes adhered to. The second thing the Shaykh says, annaha mukhtara'a, right? That it is something that is invented, right? Meaning that it doesn't have any previous example or model from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, and then he actually mentions a third one, is thirdly that this way, this path that is followed, or this innovation, is something that resembles or tries to copy or resemble something in the Sharia. And this is because when we have the Sharia, when we look at the actions in the Sharia, we find that they can be described in a number of different ways. Or we can describe actions, for example, in terms of az-zaman and al-makan and al-adad. So, for example, certain actions of worship, they are tied to time. Or, for example, Fajr occurs, at dawn, and Maghrib occurs at sunset, and then, Hajj occurs in Dhul Hijjah. So, certain actions in the Sharia, certain actions of worship, are tied to time, right? Other actions, al-makan, like some actions are tied to place. Like, for example, Hajj can only be done in Makkah. Tawaf can only be done around the Kaaba, and certain actions of worship are tied to place. Al-adad, which is number, certain actions in the Sharia are restricted in terms of the number. So, for example, the raka'at in the prayers, or the number of days that you fast, or how many days you have to fast if you willingly break the fast and you are able. Things like this. All of them have numbers. All of them are tied to numbers. So in other words, when we look at the Sharia as a whole, we find that the Sharia, or parts of the Sharia, we can look at it in terms of time and place and number and so on and so forth. Right? So the Sharia has these characteristics. And likewise, the Sharia is also such that a person seeks reward from Allah by pursuing it. Right? By acting upon the Sharia, you seek reward from Allah. So this is when we look at the Sharia. So the innovation from its characteristics, from the points regarding it, is that the innovation tries to resemble the Sharia in that respect. In that regard, it tries to resemble. So, as we will see later on, either in terms of number or place or time or whatever, you'll see that certain innovations, like for example, they might say that you do such and such on a Thursday and you do it so many times. So in other words, you find that with the innovation, you find that these things or these specifications in terms of place and time and whatever, these will be the features or characteristics of this innovation. Just like the Sharia has the same type of thing. And obviously the intent behind an innovation likewise is to try and to seek reward from Allah. So these are the 3 points which we find in the definition of Imam al-Shatibi. Because Imam al-Shatibi says that innovation is an invented way, something which is mukhtara'a, which is invented, and it is it's a path which is followed and adhered to, and it's something by which the Sharia is trying to be resembled. Someone is trying to resemble and the Sharia by way of it. So the Shaykh says that if we summarize this definition of Imam al-Shatibi, then basically we have 3 things. First of all, he says that the innovation is something that is adhered to, clung to. Secondly, that it's something that's invented and it's new, it doesn't have any previous example. Thirdly, and obviously this is where the hadith comes in, Man amila amalan laysa alayhi amruna fahuwa rad. That whoever did an action which is not in agreement with our affair, meaning Islam, then it will be rejected. So that's the second feature. And the third feature is that this innovation, it resembles something in the Sharia from the angle of time or place or description or the intent behind it. So that's the first definition. The second definition is a definition, he says, is given by a person called As-Samani, and he said, he gives the Arabic, إن البدع ما أحدث على خلاف الحق المتلقى عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قول أو عمل أو اعتقاد وجعل ذلك دينا قويما وصراطا مستقيما. That innovation is something which is invented or brought about upon something or which is opposed to the truth that was acquired from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, either in terms of speech or action or belief, and then that is made as a deen. It is made as being part of the upright deen and as part of the straight path. Right? So something that's invented or brought about, it opposes what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought, and then it is made to be from the religion, treated as being from the religion and being from the straight path. And the Shaykh says that this definition is also a correct definition likewise. And he says from it becomes clear, from this definition it becomes clear to us that innovation is anything that is introduced, newly introduced, and it is in opposition to the truth, then any such thing is batil, it is false. And that this innovation can also occur in statements and in actions and in beliefs, and it is something that is adhered to. Right? It is multazamun bihi, it is adhered to. Why? Because at the end, if you look at this definition, at the end he said that this thing that is introduced, it is made as a deen, it is made as the upright deen, and it is made into a straight path, which means that the people treat it as such, so therefore they've made it as something that is to be followed and adhered and clung to. Right? So we can see the similarities between the two definitions. So now that we've understood, now that this has become clear, now that we know the definition of exactly what is the definition of an innovation, then the Shaykh says we have to understand, or one of the important things that we have to understand is that the innovation can occur in statements and in actions and in beliefs. Right? So it's not something that's just limited to an action that someone performs. It can be in terms of a speech that someone makes, a statement that someone utters, or in terms of a belief that someone holds as well. And the Shaykh continues to say that, for example, a statement, it could be a statement, and it could be, so what could happen is that this statement, it could be given, for example, a time and a place, or in terms of number. Like, for example, someone might say, if you recite a certain verse of the Quran on a Monday, the first Monday in the month of Sha'ban or something, and then you do it 1,000 times, then such and such will result. Right? So you can see here that the time has been specified and a number has been specified, and the result likewise has been specified as well. Right? Like they mention a certain reward or a certain effect. And so this can apply to speech. This is like an innovation in speech. And likewise in actions, and a new action can be invented, and it can be given certain characteristics likewise that resemble the Sharia, like that you recite a certain supplication, for example, and this supplication is a supplication that is found in the Sharia. Right? But then so it resembles the Sharia from one angle, but then they attach these other characteristics that you recite it 50 times, of which we find no proof in the Sharia, and then you recite it at a certain time or a certain location, whatever. So all these characteristics now make this to be an innovation. Although it resembles the Sharia, it is still an innovation in terms of the details. And likewise, someone can hold beliefs. They can hold a belief which is opposed to the truth which has come from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like some people believe, for example, that Allah is not above the throne, Allah is not above the creation, or other beliefs that people hold. So all of these things, whether it's in beliefs, whether it's in statements, whether it's in actions, any person who introduces this into Islam, then it will be rejected upon him. It will be rejected upon him. Not only that, anyone who follows him in that, then that likewise will be rejected upon that person as well. So even a follower who makes that statement, or who practices that action, or who makes that speech, or that whatever it is, then likewise that will be rejected upon that person as well, even if he's just a follower. Even if he's just following. Because the follower, even though he's just following, he is still considered to be someone who is introducing something into Islam, something false and something, because by way of him acting upon this action or making this statement or whatever, then he is still treated to be someone who is introducing something into this affair. So therefore the Shaykh says, everyone who acts upon the innovation, or who speaks with an innovation, or who believes that innovated belief, then this person is in reality, he says, muhdithun nahal, that he is someone who brings it about, who invents it and brings it about. So then the Shaykh says, for this reason, it becomes established that another aspect that we need to be clear about here is that from what we've discussed now, from the foundations that we've laid, from these definitions, is that an innovation is something that is adhered to as a path, in beliefs, in statements, in actions. So for example, if a person was to make a mistake, he was to make a mistake in his belief, or he was to make a mistake in an action, then we wouldn't say about such a person that he is an innovator, because this person, because this person who made an opposition to the Sunnah, we don't treat him as being the same as an innovator. The innovator who opposes the Sunnah and who treats the way that he is upon as a path that is to be followed, and who deems it to be something good and righteous. Right? So we don't treat these two situations the same. A person who makes a mistake, for example, he makes a mistake in an issue of belief or whatever, then if he does this just once, or he falls into it twice, or he just makes a mistake, but we know that he doesn't take it as a path to be followed, then this person, we say that this person just merely made a mistake, right? We don't declare him to be an innovator. And so what becomes clear from this is that this part of this definition of innovation, where we describe it as being something that is adhered to and a path that is taken to be followed, something that is clung to, then this is a very important principle. It's a very important element of the definition that we have to bear in mind. Like he says, like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah says in some of his statements, that the rule of clinging to it, of iltizam, of this issue of sticking and adhering to something, he said that this is a very important point in distinguishing between what is an innovation and what is just merely an opposition to the Sunnah that occurs from individuals. Right? This is a very important principle. A person, for example, when he makes a mistake, we say about him, khalafa Sunnah, that he opposed the Sunnah in his actions. That's what we say. And we don't say that he is an innovator, unless and until he adheres and clings and takes his opposition as a way to be followed. In that case, then obviously we would describe him as an innovator. So we say then that any person who makes a mistake in any of the actions, or in worship, in actions of worship, we say that he opposed the Sunnah in such and such issue. That's how we describe that person. And if this person, obviously he's seeking nearness to Allah, but he makes a mistake and it occurs from him once or twice and it's a genuine mistake, then we say to him, this action of yours has opposed the Sunnah. Right? So we clarify to him. After this, if he then takes it as a way to be followed, he sticks to it, and he takes it as a way to be continuously pursued, he always does this thing, then this now enters into the confines of what is an innovation. Right? So that's the difference between the two. And it's more important to make this this distinction. Also, the Shaykh says that we also have to make a distinction between certain things that were invented, that were newly invented, but they are not really treated as innovations. The Sahaba didn't treat them as innovations like they did with other affairs. Rather, they treated these things to be permissible, and they acted upon these things as well. So what are these things? These are things which the scholars called al-masalih al-mursala. Al-masalih al-mursala. These are, if you like, certain things which the Sharia doesn't have a ruling upon, but because of a need at the time, they provide an important benefit. In from a worldly point of view. So therefore, the scholars will say that this is permissible, and this is what we call al-masalih al-mursala, meaning these are like the things that will benefit the Muslims in a worldly sense. So the Shaykh then says, what does it mean, al-masalih al-mursala? He says it means that this is an action whose ruling is based upon the benefit that can be obtained from it. So for example, in any time, if the people of knowledge or the scholars see that there is a benefit in this thing for the Muslims or whatever in the worldly sense, then they will say it's permissible. They will say it's permissible because when we look in the Sharia, we find that the Sharia doesn't have a ruling regarding this issue. It doesn't say it's haram, it doesn't say it's halal, and so for that reason the scholars will say that this is actually permissible at this point in time. And the scholars also clarify and they say that likewise the masalih al-mursala, they only occur in the affairs of the world. Only in the affairs of the world, in the worldly affairs, not in the affairs of worship. Not in the affairs of worship. So that's an important distinction to note there. And the Shaykh says that as far as the affairs of the world are concerned, we find that there are certain ways and means by which the 5 things that the religion has come to protect can be brought about. So for example, the 5 things that the Sharia has come to protect, they are, the religion, life, wealth, a person's offspring or the lineage, and likewise the intellect. Right? So the Sharia, if we look at the Sharia, we find that the Sharia and all of the rulings in the Sharia have come to protect 5 basic fundamental things. First of them is the religion. Right? So the Sharia, there are rulings in the Sharia that protect and preserve and safeguard a person's deen. Right? Secondly, life. Right? So there are things in the Sharia that protect life. Like for example, if a person commits a murder, then his life will be taken as retribution. The meaning, there are certain things in place that protect the principle of life. Thirdly, wealth, the protection of wealth. There are certain things, rulings that Allah has placed in the Sharia that protect people's wealth. And then likewise lineage. For example, there are certain rulings regarding naming your children and things like that ensure that the lineage is preserved. Right? A person's lineage is preserved and kept intact. So, and likewise aql, the intellect. Like for example, intoxicants are forbidden, harmful things are prohibited because the intellect is harmed by way of them. So in other words, that these masalih and mursala that we're speaking of here, they apply to the affairs of the world, of the worldly affairs, and likewise they can also apply to the 5 things that the Sharia has come to protect, as we've already mentioned, which is deen, life, wealth, intellect, and lineage. And the Shaykh says, for example, and the Shaykh then gives an example to illustrate the point, to illustrate the principle. So he says, for example, it's permissible for us to invent something or to bring about something that will help to protect the religion of the people. Right? Why? Because this is one of the necessities of the religion, as we've already said. For example, to author books. Right? Because authoring books, was it found in the time of the Prophet ﷺ? There was no such thing. We didn't find in the time of the Prophet ﷺ people authoring books, putting them on paper, binding them in books, and authoring them. This was never found. It was never found in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. However, the authoring of books is something, it doesn't have any ruling in the Sharia, but the authoring of books is a method and a ways and a means of preserving the religion, of preserving and maintaining the religion. So therefore, we find that after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the scholars began to author books. They began to compile books of Hadeeth. They began to write books on the issues of Aqidah. They began to write books of refutation against the groups which appeared, like Imaam Ahmad did and other than them. And so we find that authoring books, although it was prohibited in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like another example, in the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prohibited the people from writing the Hadith. He prohibited the people. And likewise, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he also prohibited that the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ should be written. And the reason was that they didn't want it to be mixed up with the Quran and things like that. So it was prohibited in that time. And after that time, the situation arose, because the need arose for the Hadith to be compiled, and for the astray groups to be refuted, and for the affairs of belief to be outlined in what was the belief of the Sahaba, for that to be written and preserved. So because that necessity arose in the later time, then that's why the authoring of books began. Right? Whereas in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, no such necessity or no such need actually existed. So the Shaykh says that in light of this, it's important now that we distinguish between an innovation, a bid'ah, and what is from the masalih al-mursala or maslahatul mursala. We have to distinguish between the two. Now we need to, we can't mix up the two, because clearly there are two separate issues here. So the Shaykh says there are two important distinctions. First of all, he says that an innovation in the religion, that it's really focused upon the end goals, right? It's focused upon the end goals. It has goals. Whereas a maslahatul mursala is really directed towards the ways and the means by which end goals can be achieved. Let me explain what that means. In the example that the Shaykh has just given, for example, authoring books. Authoring books is really just a ways and a means for something else. Right? It's a ways and a means for preserving and maintaining the religion. Like, for example, we could say in our time that recording cassettes, recording CDs, creating MP3s of the lectures and the statements of the scholars is a ways and a means of preserving the methodology, or the manhaj or the methodology of Islam and of the Sunnah, and distributing them. It's a ways and a means. So although the goal is to preserve the heritage of the scholars, although the means is just a mechanism. So the means here is just to record and record their statements. So when we look at the maslahatul mursala, the benefit that we find in time that we make use of in different times, we find that benefit is always tends to be like a ways and a means towards an end. Whereas an innovation is actually something that it's something that's intended in and of itself for itself, right? So, for example, someone invents, like for example, someone celebrates the Prophet's birthday. That is intended in and of itself, with the goal that they want to, that they think that they are loving the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they are becoming closer to Allah. So it's something that's sought in and of itself. Whereas with a maslahatul mursala, it is a means towards a goal, towards another goal, towards something else. That's the first thing. That's the first distinction. The second distinction is that innovation is something that the need for it was present, or the circumstances were present in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for it to be done, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't do it. That's one of the characteristics of an innovation. That, in other words, that the circumstances were present in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for the companions to have done this, but yet they didn't do it, and they didn't do it out of knowledge. Like what for some of the people do. For example, people used to sit in a circle, making dhikr, counting it on stones, right? The companions never did that, even though it was perfectly easy for them to do that. The situation might require that they do that. So this is one of the features of innovation, which is that the circumstances or the requirements to do this innovation existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but he never did it. Whereas the maslahatul mursala is the other way around. That there wasn't a need, there wasn't the circumstances in the time of the Prophet ﷺ for this maslahatul mursala, for it to be done. And so therefore it wasn't done. Like for example, we've given that example already, authoring of books was never needed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The bringing together of the Quran, like for example, the bringing the Quran together in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was never brought together. The whole of the Quran was never brought together in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So do we say, for example, that the Quran now is a bid'ah, is an innovation? Right? This Quran put together between two covers, do we say it's an innovation? The answer is, no. Because in the time of the Sahaba, the scholars, they agreed, after the Messenger, they agreed that to put the Quran together is one of the greatest obligations which the Ummah can ever stand to perform, or which the Ummah can perform. But this was because the need arose in that time for the Quran to be brought together. As for in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there wasn't a need to do that. Why? Because the revelation was still being revealed, and if, for example, the whole of the Quran was being put together, we know that there were certain verses that were abrogated. So then what would happen is those verses would need to be crossed out, and then there would need to be side notes filling in those gaps, whatever, and then it would it would lead to a situation that is undesirable, right? In the sense that it could cause confusion. So we find that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was not any need for the Quran to be brought together. However, due to the wisdom of Allah, Allah never commanded the Prophet ﷺ to bring the Quran together in a single book in his life. But when the revelation ended, and when the Messenger ﷺ passed away, then Abu Bakr, brought it together, and then it was again after his time it was brought together as a complete mushaf. And then the Shaykh says there were many other things as well. There were other things as well which fall into the same category, meaning a maslahatul mursala, again, which is different to an innovation. So remember the difference. Innovation is something which the circumstances for which existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but they never did it. Why? Because it was not from the religion. Whereas with maslahatul mursala, like a prevailing benefit, then the need for it didn't exist in the time of the Messenger ﷺ. It came afterwards. So he gives some other example. He says, for example, using certain types of machinery or tools, or writing about different types of sciences, and being concerned with different types of knowledge and sciences, again relating to the Sharia, like for example the knowledge of Hadeeth and things like that. Building cities and setting up, for example, if you like ministries, between countries, delegations and things of that nature, in terms of political interaction with other lands and things like that. All of these things, some of these things occurred in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, and likewise in the time of the other rulers after him. And so these things, as we said, there wasn't any need for them in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but because that need arose, and because these issues don't have a ruling in the Sharia, then the scholars permitted those affairs, to help, again, for the goal that we said, to help us to realize certain worldly benefits, and likewise to help preserve the 5 things that the religion preserves, which is the deen, and life, and intellect, and wealth, and lineage. And so therefore the Shaykh says, summarizing this discussion, no doubt we know that the maslahatul mursala is muhdatha, no doubt it's something that's newly invented, it's something that wasn't done before, no doubt. However, we cannot describe or we can't apply this hadith to it. We can't say, man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad. And we can't apply this hadith to, for example, the collection of the Quran, or the collection of the books of the hadith and things like that. We can't apply that because it's not the same as the these are just ways and means that have been employed in order to fulfill another goal, right? So they're not the same as innovations. And secondly, the Shaykh says that these things are not innovations in the religion, right? To author books is not an innovation in the religion. To use a microphone or a speaker is not an innovation in the religion, right? It's like a worldly thing. It's a ways and a means from the worldly point of view. And so these things then, the scholars have called them masalih al-mursala, and the Shaykh said that these are desirable things, that we adopt them, that we make use of them from the angle that they allow us to fulfill certain goals. And this is because the Shaykh says that these ways and means have the same rulings as the end objectives, right? For example, education, for example, is wajib. To teach and to spread the religion is wajib. So on that basis, a school, if we set up a school which teaches, the Aqidah and the Sharia and teaches the Muslim there, whatever, then whatever is taught, it has the same ruling as the end objective. Like, for example, if a school was set up in order to teach, for example, the Sufi belief, to teach Wahdatul Wujud and these other kind of beliefs, that would... So, although building a school in and of itself is just a ways and a means, and it doesn't have any ruling in the Sharia, right? We look at what is the end goal behind it. If the end goal behind it is to teach, the false belief or whatever, then the building of the school is haram. So the ways and means have the same rulings as the intended goals behind them, right? So the Shaykh says, and then he carries on, he speaks about the ibadat, the actions of worship, how they are, one type of affairs that are found in the Sharia. Likewise, the mu'amalat, like the dealings between the people in the interactions with each other, they too are from the Sharia. So, regarding the affairs of worship, that's straightforward. Someone invents an act of worship which is opposed to the Sharia, opposed to the Sunnah, then no doubt this is newly invented and it is an innovation in the religion. So the acts of worship, it's fairly clear. As for the mu'amalat, because some of the mu'amalat are the dealings between the people, like for example in trade, or like inheritance, or like marriage, or things like that. These are the rules in the Sharia that determine how people interact. So likewise in the mu'amalat, there can be innovations. For example, the Shaykh says, for example, someone treats interest like a contract of interest. He says he makes it to be permissible, right? So a contract which involves interest, a person says, well, no, this is now permissible. This now becomes an innovation in an affair which is an affair of mu'amala, meaning trade and dealing between the people. Or, for example, he might, make something to be halal which the Sharia has made to be haram. Or, for example, there might be a condition attached to something, like a Sharia condition, and he will nullify that Sharia condition, right? So that action likewise is something that is muhdath and something which is an innovation, and that too is rejected upon that person. Like, for example, he says the punishment for zina, when a person commits zina, the punishment is the person who is married, then he is stoned, and a person who is not married, then they are lashed and they are exiled. I mean, they are banished from the land. And so, if someone says, "Well, no, we won't use that punishment anymore. We will just impose a fine," right? So we'll impose a fine. Then this again, this is something that this is rejected, even if it's to do in the mu'amalat. Remember, this is not to do with the affairs of worship. This is to do with the mu'amalat. That too is an innovation, and this will be rejected upon the person. And the Shaykh says, so we find here that sometimes, often you hear a principle, that the principle concerning the affairs of worship is that they are that we're not allowed to worship unless there is a text. And the principle concerning the mu'amalat is the dealings is that they are permissible unless there is something that declares them to be impermissible. The Shaykh says that this thing here is slightly different to that. It's different. And so anyway, the Shaykh clarifies this a bit more, and then finally he finishes off the discussion by saying that this hadith, so this brings us to the end of the discussion, he says that this hadith applies to all of the affairs of the religion. This hadith, Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fawarad. Whoever introduces something into this affair of ours will have it rejected. He says this applies to all affairs of the religion. In tahara, in purification, in as-salah, in the prayer, in az-zakah, in charity, in fasting, in hajj, in buying and selling, in trading, by way of in trading, in loans, in exchange, in renting, in nikah, in marriage, in divorce. In fact, in all of the affairs, not restricted just to affairs of worship. Even in the rulings and the dealings between the people, it enters into those affairs as well. So the Shaykh says, this is where he finishes the discussion, and this brings us to the end of the discussion of this hadith. So hopefully, inshallah, from this discussion, we've got a better understanding of this hadith, of the application of this hadith, the definition of innovations. We understand the difference between a person falling into an innovation and making it as a path to be followed. The difference between that and between a person just falling into a mistake once, twice. With that person we say, you have opposed the sunnah. And with a person who persists upon choosing that as a path to be followed, that is an innovation. Like, for example, people persist in celebrating the Prophet's birthday, or they persist in doing other certain affairs of innovation, and that is an innovation from them. And likewise, we distinguish between an innovation and a maslahatul mursala, like a prevailing benefit at any given time that is made permissible as a ways and means to help achieve another goal, right? Like examples we've already discussed. We have to distinguish between that and between an innovation. Don't confuse between that and between an innovation. And when you understand what the Shaykh has explained in his explanation, when you understand these principles, then many things will become clear. Many doubts will become clear, because many people will come to you sometimes and they will say to you, well, okay then, so the Quran, isn't that an innovation? Because there wasn't a book called the Quran in the time of Rasulullah. So you know how to answer this. Or some people will say, well, is using a microphone, is using an airplane, isn't that bid'ah? Because, are you saying that we shouldn't use these things now? Again, this is foolishness, because these are not innovations in the religion. These are not ways which are made by which nearness to Allah is sought. And these are just worldly things, So hopefully, inshallah, this explanation of this hadith has given us certain foundations of understanding regarding this hadith that will allow us to address some of these types of doubts and misconceptions, and to reply to them. So we end the lesson here then, and we'll continue in the next hadith, another famous important hadith. Hadith is a hadith of Abu Abdullah an-Nu'man bin Bushayr, regarding the hadith, Inna al-halal bayin wa inna al-haram bayin. Indeed, the halal is clear and the haram is clear. Wa baynahuma umurun mushtabihatun. And between the affairs are, unclear affairs. So inshallah, that hadith we will discuss in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala.